Hello, my name is Lucian Carter, 37 years old. I live in Seattle, where the drizzle and the city lights seem to always conceal stories of sorrow. I am a real estate entrepreneur who built everything from scratch after leaving behind a past full of pain. But to tell you how I became the person I am today, I must take you back to Franklin, Pennsylvania, the place where I grew up, where the memories of a childhood both sweet and bitter still haunt me every night. Franklin in the 1980s was a small town with tree-lined streets and cozy wooden houses. My family lived in an old mansion where the walls seemed to be steeped in my mother Eleanor's laughter and love. My mother was my light, a woman with a gentle smile and hands always ready to embrace me. She taught me how to fold paper cranes, how to watch the sunset, and to believe that this world, though sometimes harsh, is still full of wonders. I remember afternoons sitting with her in the kitchen, filled with the aroma of freshly baked cookies, as she told me fairy tales or sang lullabies that I still know by heart to this day. My father, James Carter, was a successful real estate businessman who founded Carter Enterprises. He was often away, but whenever he returned, he always brought small gifts for me: a toy car, a picture book, or simply a strong hug that made me feel like the center of the world. But that light was extinguished when I was 8 years old. My mother was diagnosed with breast cancer, and that cruel disease took her away in just 1 year. I still remember the day she lay in the hospital bed, her eyes fading but still trying to smile at me. "Lucian, you have to be strong, okay? I'll always be here in your heart." Those were the last words she said to me before closing her eyes forever. My mother's funeral is a hazy memory, as if I was standing there but my mind was drifting elsewhere. I only remember the sound of people crying, the patter of rain on umbrellas, and the emptiness that felt like the whole world had collapsed. My father, a man who was always tough, hugged me tightly that day, but I didn't know it would also be the last time I felt closeness from him. After my mother's death, my father changed. He threw himself into work as a way to escape the pain, leaving me in that vast house with its cold walls. I began to feel like a shadow, silently passing through the hallways trying to find a bit of warmth in my mother's keepsakes. The scarf she once knitted, the diary she left behind, or the paper cranes we folded together. Then when I was 10, my father brought Vivian home. Vivian was a tall, slender woman with meticulously styled blonde hair and eyes as sharp as knives. She entered our home with her 2 children, Chloe and Elias, like uninvited guests. My father introduced Vivian as my new mother, but from the very first moment I knew she could never replace my mother. Vivian brought a strange atmosphere. The house, already gloomy after my mother's death, now felt even more oppressive. She quickly took over every space, from rearranging the living room furniture to deciding the dinner menu. My father, seemingly captivated by her charm, didn't notice that I was gradually being pushed out of the family's center. Chloe, 2 years older than me, was a haughty girl with a fake smile. Elias, a year younger, was aggressive and loved picking fights. From the very first days, they made me feel like I didn't belong. Chloe often mocked me, calling me the orphan when my father and Vivian weren't around. Elias liked to push me down or hide my toys, laughing gleefully whenever I got angry. Vivian not only condoned but also encouraged Chloe and Elias's behavior. She often spoke harsh words as if my existence was a burden. "Lucian, why can't you be like Chloe and Elias? They're so much better behaved than you," she said, her tone sweet but laced with malice. Once I overheard her telling my father that I was the extra child, that I made him remember my mother, a memory she wanted to erase. I tried to tell my father what was happening, but he just waved it off, saying I needed to adjust to the new family. "Vivian is a good person, Lucian. You need to give her time," he said, his eyes weary. I didn't entirely blame him. He was trying to rebuild his life, trying to fill the void my mother left. But every time he dismissed my words, I felt like I was losing a bit of his love. The years that followed were a long chain of pain. At school, I became withdrawn and quiet. My classmates started calling me the weird kid because I often sat alone, drawing paper cranes or scribbling in my mother's old notebook. At home, I tried to avoid Vivian and her children, but they always found ways to hurt me. Once when I was 12, Elias tore apart a paper crane that my mother and I had folded together. I lunged at him, tears streaming from anger and pain. Vivian appeared at that moment, not bothering to ask what happened, and slapped me hard across the face. "How dare you hit my son, you ill-mannered brat!" she screamed, pulling Elias into her arms as if he were the victim. My father, when he heard the story, only sighed and told me to apologize. I didn't apologize. Instead, I ran to my room, locked the door, and cried until I had no tears left. Those hurts piled up, like invisible scars I carried throughout my childhood. I began to dream of a day when I could leave Franklin, leave Vivian, Chloe, and Elias behind. I imagined going somewhere far away where no one knew who I was, where I could start over. But back then, I was just a 12-year-old boy with no money, no power, only paper cranes and memories of my mother to hold on to. One night when I was 13, I found my mother's diary in an old box under my bed. Her handwritten words were like a beam of light piercing through the darkness. She wrote about me, about her love for me and her hope that I would grow up to be a strong, kind man. "My Lucian, you are my most precious gift. Never let anyone make you doubt your worth," she wrote. I read those words over and over as if they were a protective charm. The diary became my refuge, where I poured out my anger, my loneliness, and my dreams of freedom. I promised my mother and myself that one day I would leave this place. I wouldn't let Vivian or anyone else define me. My final years of middle school passed in silence and endurance. I excelled in school not to please my father or Vivian, but because I knew education was my only way out. I spent hours in the library reading everything I could, from my father's business books to my mother's adventure novels. I dreamed of a future where I could stand on my own 2 feet, where I wouldn't have to bow to anyone. When I was 16, my father began talking about me taking over Carter Enterprises one day. He called me into his office, where portraits of generations of Carters hung on the walls, and spoke about the family legacy. "Lucian, you're the heir. This company will be yours," he said, his voice full of pride. But I didn't feel proud. I felt pressure, and part of me wondered if he truly wanted me to take over or was just trying to make up for the years he'd neglected me. Vivian, of course, wasn't pleased with the idea. I overheard her telling my father that I was not mature enough to run the company, that Elias was the one with leadership qualities. Elias, a 15-year-old who only knew how to bully others, was a leader in her eyes. I wasn't surprised, but her words still cut like a knife. When I was 17, I received an acceptance letter from a university far from Franklin. It was the first spark of hope I'd felt in years. I knew this was my chance to leave the house full of pain, to start a new life. I packed my bags, taking my mother's diary and a few paper cranes, preparing for the journey ahead. The night before I left, I stood in front of the mirror, looking into my own eyes. I was no longer the 12-year-old boy crying over a torn paper crane. I was taller, stronger, but deep inside I still carried the pain of losing my mother, my father's indifference, and the scars left by Vivian, Chloe, and Elias. I promised myself I wouldn't let the past define my future. I would build a new life, one that my mother would be proud of. And so, I left Franklin, carrying with me painful memories, but also a fierce determination. I boarded the bus, leaving town early one morning when the mist still blanketed the oak-lined streets. In my backpack, I had only a few clothes, my mother's diary, and the worn-out paper cranes. I didn't look back, unwilling to see the house where I had once felt like a stranger. I was 18, penniless, with no family to rely on, but I had something Vivian, Chloe, or Elias could never take away: hope. The bus took me to Pittsburgh, where I would begin my college life at Carnegie Mellon University. I chose this school not only for the scholarship, but also because it was far enough from Franklin to let me feel like I could breathe. When the bus stopped at the station, I stood in the middle of an unfamiliar city, gazing at the towering skyscrapers and the bustling crowds. My heart was both excited and afraid. This was my chance to start over, but it was also the first time I had to face the world with no one behind me. My dorm was a small, cramped room with 2 bunk beds and a rickety desk. My roommate Raj was an Indian-American guy with a friendly smile and an energetic voice. "Yo, Lucian, where you from?" he asked as soon as I dragged my suitcase into the room. I hesitated, not wanting to talk about Franklin or my family. "A small town, nothing special," I replied, and Raj nodded, not pressing further. I was grateful for that. The first days of college were a whirlwind of new experiences. I was overwhelmed by the classes, the dense lectures, and the students around me. They seemed far more confident than I was. I majored in business administration, partly because I knew my father wanted me to take over Carter Enterprises, but also because I wanted to prove I could achieve something great without him or anyone else. But college life wasn't as easy as I'd imagined. The scholarship covered tuition, but living expenses, food, books, and small things like soap or toothpaste quickly made me realize I needed a job. I got hired as a server at a coffee shop near campus, where the smell of roasted coffee filled my mornings and the noisy grind of the machine was like a never-ending song. The job ate up most of my free time, but it gave me a sense of freedom I'd never had in Franklin. Working at the coffee shop was also where I learned to interact with strangers. I was naturally reserved, always keeping my distance for fear of being hurt like I was as a child. But here I had to smile at customers, chat with coworkers, and sometimes listen to their life stories. There was an elderly woman named Martha who came to the shop every Wednesday, always ordering a latte and reading for hours. One day she looked at me and said, "You have sad eyes, but they're full of determination. Don't let the past hold you back, okay?" I only smiled, but her words cut deep, stirring the pain I'd tried to bury. Late at night, back in the dorm, I'd sit at my desk and open my mother's diary. I wrote in it about everything, from the small joy of acing a test to the loneliness of watching my peers call home, telling their families about their lives. I didn't call Franklin. My father called a few times, but our conversations were always short and awkward. "Are you okay, Lucian?" he'd ask. "Yes, I'm fine," I'd reply, even though I was struggling every day. I didn't want him to know how hard it was, didn't want him to think I was weak. Vivian, of course, never called. I heard from my father that she and her 2 children were still living with him, that Elias was preparing for college and Chloe was joining social clubs at school. Those stories made me feel like an outsider, as if I'd never been part of that family. But strangely, their indifference no longer hurt as much. I was building my own life, and that was what mattered most. College wasn't just about studying and working. I started making new friends, people who knew nothing about my past. Raj became my closest friend. He'd drag me to watch school basketball games or to noisy student parties where I'd usually stand in a corner, holding a soda and observing everyone. "You gotta loosen up a bit, Lucian," Raj would say, clapping me on the shoulder. I'd smile, but I knew my guarded nature wasn't something I could easily shake off. One day in an economics class, I met Sarah, a girl with curly brown hair and eyes that seemed to sparkle with life. She sat next to me, asked to borrow a pen, and from there we started talking. Sarah was different from anyone I'd ever met. She was straightforward, funny, but also sensitive. Once, when I casually mentioned my mother, she took my hand and said, "Losing someone you love is the hardest thing, but you're still here, still trying. That's really admirable." I didn't know how to respond, only that for the first time in years I felt understood. Sarah and I became friends, then grew closer. We'd study together, staying in the library until late, sharing bags of cookies and stories about our dreams. She wanted to be a journalist, to tell stories that could change the world. I told her about my dream of building real estate projects not just for profit but to help communities, affordable housing, green parks, places people could call home. Sarah always listened, and sometimes her gaze made me believe those dreams weren't so far-fetched. But life wasn't always smooth. Some days I was exhausted from balancing school, work, and the emotions still simmering from my past. One night, while working a late shift at the coffee shop, I got a call from my father. His voice was shaky, unlike his usual self. "Lucian, I want you to come home for Christmas. The family needs you." I felt silent anger and hurt rising within me. Family? What family? The one that pushed me to the sidelines, that let Vivian and her children torment me? I told him I was busy, that I had an important exam, and hung up. But afterward, I sat in a corner of the shop, hands trembling, wondering if I was being too harsh on him. That Christmas, I didn't go back to Franklin. I stayed in Pittsburgh, picking up extra shifts to make money and avoid the emptiness. Raj invited me to his family's house for dinner, and I had a warm evening with them. People who welcomed me like I was one of their own. But back in the dorm, I opened my mother's diary and cried. I missed her, missed the Christmases when she was alive, when the house in Franklin was filled with laughter. I wondered if I'd ever find that feeling again. In my sophomore year, I joined the school's entrepreneurship club. It was where I learned to turn ideas into reality, where I met ambitious and passionate young people. I pitched a project about affordable housing, inspired by the poor neighborhoods I'd seen in Pittsburgh. My project was selected to be presented at a university startup competition, and for the first time, I felt truly valuable. The night before the presentation, I stayed up practicing in front of the mirror, imagining my mother sitting there smiling at me. The presentation was a success beyond my expectations. My team won second place, and a professor invited me to be a research assistant for a project on sustainable urban development. That was a turning point in my life. I started to believe I could achieve something, that I wasn't just the boy pushed aside by his stepfamily. But the joy didn't last long. One day I received a letter from Franklin, not from my father, but from Vivian. The letter was brief, cold, informing me that my father wanted me to work at Carter Enterprises after graduation. "James believes you have potential, though I'm not so sure," she wrote. I tore the letter apart, angry enough to want to scream. Vivian, who never saw me as family, now wanted to control my future. I decided I wouldn't return to Franklin, wouldn't work for Carter Enterprises. I would forge my own path. My final college years passed faster than I expected. I took on more jobs, from waiting tables to tutoring freshmen. I saved every penny, not out of stinginess, but because I wanted a safety net so I'd never have to depend on anyone. Sarah stayed by my side as a friend, a confidant, and sometimes I wondered if I was starting to feel something deeper for her. But I wasn't ready to open my heart. The shadow of my past was still too large. At graduation, I stood in the auditorium watching families applaud their loved ones. My father didn't come. He sent a congratulatory card with a check I never touched. I wasn't angry, not exactly. I was just sad, knowing the distance between us had grown too wide, and I wasn't sure it could be bridged. I left Pittsburgh with a business administration degree and a big dream. I imagined myself heading to a new city, perhaps Seattle or Boston, where I could start my real estate career on my own terms, building affordable housing, sustainable communities, places people could call home. But life, as my mother once said, has a way of forcing us to face the things we try to escape. Just a few weeks after graduation, a call from my father pulled me back to Franklin, the place I swore I'd never return to. It was a rainy afternoon, and I was sitting in my small Pittsburgh apartment reviewing job offers from a few startups. The phone rang, and my father's voice came through, low but heavy with urgency. "Lucian, I need you to come home. Carter Enterprises needs you." I fell silent, my hand gripping the phone tightly. Home? Home was where Vivian called me a burden, where Chloe and Elias turned me into a joke, but my father's tone left no room for refusal. "This is the family legacy, Lucian. You're the heir. I'm not getting any younger," he said, and I could hear the exhaustion in his words. I wanted to say no, to scream that I didn't need Carter Enterprises, that I could make it on my own. But a part of me, the part that still craved his approval, wavered. I thought about the times he told me about the company, the portraits hanging in his office, the legacy he and the generations before him had built. I wondered if this was my chance to prove I wasn't the failure Vivian always claimed I was. So against every instinct, I agreed. I packed my things, said goodbye to Pittsburgh, promised Sarah I'd keep in touch, and returned to Franklin. As the bus passed the "Welcome to Franklin, Pennsylvania" sign, my stomach churned. The old house loomed before me, still grand but as cold as I remembered. Vivian stood at the door, her fake smile plastered on. "Lucian, it's been so long," she said, her voice syrupy. I nodded, said nothing, and stepped inside, feeling like a wayward traveler lost in a foreign land. Carter Enterprises was located in the heart of Franklin, a 3-story building with a gleaming glass facade. My father greeted me in his office, giving me a brief, awkward hug. "You've grown so much," he said, his eyes tinged with sadness. I wanted to ask why he didn't come to my graduation, why he let Vivian control our family, but I held my tongue. I knew I wasn't here to reopen old wounds, but to work. He introduced me to the staff, calling me the one who'll take over the company someday. I saw skeptical looks from a few, especially from Elias, now a 22-year-old with a smug grin. He worked in the project development department, a position I suspected Vivian had arranged. Chloe, now a stylish 25-year-old, handled public relations. Vivian, of course, had no official title but was present at every meeting, like a shadow pulling strings from behind the scenes. My job started as a low-level project manager, a way for my father to test me, as he put it. But I quickly realized it was Vivian's scheme. She and Elias wanted to keep me under their thumb, easy to control as they maneuvered for power in the company. They assigned me menial tasks, checking paperwork, writing reports, even running errands, as if I were an intern, not the chairman's son. I gritted my teeth and endured, determined to prove I wasn't useless. I spent hours studying the company's projects, reading every document I could find. Carter Enterprises had once been a visionary company, building affordable housing and community centers. But under Vivian's influence, it had shifted toward luxury projects, high-end condos, shopping malls, things that brought high profits. I saw this as a betrayal of what my father had taught me, a betrayal of Carter Enterprises' lifelong mission. It also went against my dreams. I started pitching ideas in meetings. I talked about building affordable housing, using eco-friendly materials, and investing in Franklin's forgotten communities. A few veteran employees supported my ideas, but Vivian and Elias always shot them down. "Lucian, you're young. You don't understand the market," Elias said condescendingly. Vivian would smile and say things like, "Nice idea, but it's not practical. We need to think about profits." My father, who should have backed me, just sat silently, his gaze distant. His silence hurt more than Vivian's barbs. I wanted him to speak up, to defend me like he did when I was a child. But he didn't. I began to doubt whether he truly wanted me to take over the company or if he'd only called me back out of guilt. Tensions peaked during a meeting about a new project, a luxury resort Elias and Vivian were pushing. It required demolishing an old neighborhood where hundreds of families lived. I couldn't stay quiet. I stood up, my voice trembling but firm, and presented an alternative plan. Renovate the neighborhood, build affordable housing, and create jobs for locals. "This isn't just about profit," I said. "It's about our responsibility to the community." The room fell silent. I looked at my father, hoping he'd support me, but he only sighed and said, "Lucian, you're too naive. Elias's project is already approved. We can't change it now." His words cut like a knife. Elias smirked. Vivian clapped as if she'd just watched a play. My blood boiled, but I said nothing. I grabbed my files and left the meeting, the door slamming behind me. That night, I sat in my old room staring at the paper cranes hanging on the wall. I called Sarah, the only person I felt could understand me. "I don't belong here, Sarah," I said, my voice choking. "I tried, but they don't need me." She listened, then said, "Lucian, you don't need to prove anything to them. You're you, and that's enough." Her words comforted me, but they couldn't erase the sting of betrayal. I started thinking about leaving Franklin. I didn't want to live in Vivian's shadow or work for a company that went against my values. But part of me still wanted to stay, to save Carter Enterprises, to reclaim the legacy my father and his ancestors had built. I was torn between loyalty to my father and the desire for freedom. One morning I went to the office early, hoping to talk to my father alone. I knocked on his door, but there was no answer. I pushed it open and found him slumped over his desk, clutching an old photo of my mother. I froze, unsure what to do. He looked up, his eyes weary. "Lucian," he said, his voice hoarse, "I'm sorry. I haven't been the father you deserved." For the first time in years, I saw my father so vulnerable. I wanted to hug him, to say I forgave him, but I couldn't. Too much pain had built up. I only nodded and left the room, carrying a mix of hurt and hope. Maybe deep down the father who once loved me was still there. But that hope didn't last. In another meeting, Elias openly criticized me in front of the staff, calling my ideas childish. Vivian laughed and my father stayed silent. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, looked straight at my father and said, "If this is how you want to run the company, I don't belong here." I walked out, ignoring the stares following me. That night I packed my things, resolved to leave Franklin. I didn't know where I'd go, but I knew I couldn't stay. I wrote a letter to my father saying I wasn't angry but needed to find my own path. I left it on his desk and departed Franklin at dawn, carrying both pain and a sense of liberation. I drove aimlessly, unsure of what I was searching for or where I'd end up. I just kept going, driving, resting, then driving again, as if escaping the past was enough. After nearly a week wandering highways, sleeping in unfamiliar rundown motels, I decided my destination would be Seattle. That would be where I'd begin writing my own story. I chose Seattle for a simple reason. It was on the other side of the country, as far from Franklin as I could get. I had no clear plan, no connections, no job waiting, just a business administration degree, a few $1,000s in savings, and a burning dream to build sustainable communities. When I stepped into downtown Seattle, I breathed in the salty sea air mingled with the aroma of coffee from small roadside cafes. This city, with its skyscrapers and sudden rain, seemed to promise a fresh start. The first days in Seattle were a challenge. I rented a small damp room in Rainier Valley where the walls peeled and the sound of car horns echoed through the night. My savings dwindled faster than I expected, and I had to find work immediately. I landed a job as an assistant at a small real estate company called Green Horizon, which focused on affordable housing projects. The work wasn't glamorous. I mostly handled paperwork, answered phones, and ran errands. But it gave me a chance to learn from people genuinely passionate about transforming communities. The company's owner, Harold Christie, was a Nordic man in his 50s. He was tall and sturdy with sharp eyes but a warm, friendly smile. He noticed my hard work and often asked for my input in meetings, even though I was just a new employee. Once, when I suggested turning an abandoned lot into a community park, he nodded and said, "You've got vision, Lucian. Don't let anyone make you doubt that." His words reminded me of my mother, of the lines in her diary, and I felt a surge of strength rise within me. But life in Seattle wasn't always easy. Some nights I lay on my creaky bed staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering if I was on the right path. I missed Sarah, our late-night study sessions in the library, her warm voice. We kept in touch by phone, but the distance and busy schedules made our conversations less frequent. "I'm proud of you, Lucian," she said during one call. "But don't forget to take time for yourself, okay?" I smiled, promised I would, but deep down, I knew I was racing against myself, trying to prove I didn't need Franklin or Carter Enterprises. My first year in Seattle, I worked relentlessly. I learned to analyze real estate markets, negotiate with contractors, and collaborate with community organizations. Green Horizon wasn't as big as Carter Enterprises, but here, I felt valued. I started working on a major project, building affordable housing for low-income families. I spent hours researching designs, sourcing eco-friendly materials, and working with urban planners. When the project was completed, seeing families move into their new homes brought a joy I'd never felt in Franklin. But success didn't come easily. Some days I worked to exhaustion, falling asleep at my desk amid piles of papers. There were times investors rejected me, calling me too idealistic for talking about sustainable development. Once, a major investor looked at me and said, "You're young, Lucian. The market doesn't care about dreams. It cares about money." I smiled, but inside I was furious. I didn't want to become someone who chased profits at all costs, like Vivian and Elias had done with Carter Enterprises. To make ends meet, I took a part-time job at a bar on weekends. The work was grueling with late shifts and drunken patrons, but it taught me patience and how to handle pressure. One night, while wiping down the counter, I overheard a customer talk about his father, a man who'd abandoned his family for work. The story made me think of my father, of the letter I'd left on his desk. I wondered if he'd read it, if he thought of me, but I quickly pushed the thought away. I couldn't let the past pull me back. In my second year in Seattle, I began to build a reputation. Green Horizons' affordable housing project caught the attention of local media, and my name appeared in an article titled "Young Man Changing Seattle's Landscape." Harold called me into his office, patted my shoulder, and said, "You're doing great, Lucian, but this is just the beginning." He offered me the chance to lead a new, larger project, a complex combining housing, a park, and a community center. I agreed, knowing it would be my biggest challenge yet. After nearly 3 years of tireless work, the complex was finally completed. On the opening day, I stood in the new park watching children play and families laugh together, and I felt tears welling up. I thought of my mother, the paper cranes, her words urging me never to doubt my worth. I had done it, not with Carter Enterprises, not with my father's help, but on my own. But life has a way of pulling you back to where you started. One morning, as I prepared for a meeting, my phone rang. An unfamiliar woman's voice introduced herself as a nurse who'd cared for my father in his final days. "Mr. James passed away, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice trembling. "I need to meet you. There are things you need to know." My heart seemed to stop. My father was gone. Why hadn't anyone told me, and what secrets was she talking about? I put everything on hold and booked a flight to Franklin. I didn't know what I'd face, but I knew the past, despite my efforts to escape it, was calling me back. I looked out the window, watching rain fall on Seattle's streets, and told myself that no matter what happened, I wouldn't let anyone destroy what I'd built. The rain fell lightly on Franklin's streets as I set foot in the town after nearly 5 years away. I didn't go to the house, but headed straight to Franklin Funeral Home, located at the end of Maple Street. It was a small building with white walls and frosted glass doors. As I stepped inside, the scent of lilies hit me, mingling with the chill of the air conditioning. I saw a few familiar faces, veteran Carter Enterprises employees, some old neighbors, but no one dared meet my eyes. They whispered, their glances averted, as if I were a ghost from the past. Then I saw them, Vivian, Chloe, and Elias, standing in a corner near my father's casket. Vivian, now in her 50s, still maintained her polished appearance with meticulously curled blonde hair and an elegant black dress. Chloe, her face heavily made up, was talking to a man I didn't recognize. Elias, taller than I remembered, stood with his arms crossed, his eyes cold and challenging. They didn't notice me at first, but when I approached, all three turned and the room's atmosphere seemed to freeze. "Lucian?" Vivian spoke first, her voice syrupy but sharp with thorns. "What are you doing here?" The way she addressed me, as if I were a stranger, made my blood boil. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I'm here to say goodbye to my father," I said, my voice steady but firm. "I have every right to be here, Vivian." She smirked, stepping closer, her high heels clicking on the wooden floor. "Right? You abandoned James, abandoned this family. You think you can show up here like some hero?" She glanced at Chloe and Elias as if seeking their support. Chloe nodded and Elias took a step forward, eyeing me up and down. "You're here to claim the inheritance, aren't you?" Elias said, his tone condescending. Don't pretend to grieve. Dad didn't need you and neither do we. I clenched my fists, fighting to suppress my anger. I wanted to shout that I never cared about my father's wealth, that I just wanted to see him one last time. But I knew arguing with them was pointless. They'd built a narrative in their heads where I was the traitor, the greedy one. I looked past Elias to the oak casket in the center of the room draped in white flowers. My father lay there and I wasn't ready to face the reality that he was gone forever. I'm not here to argue, I said, stepping past Elias toward the casket. But Vivian blocked my path, her hand pressing against my chest, her eyes sharp as knives. You're not allowed near him, she said, her voice low but threatening. James was my husband, the father of Chloe and Elias. You're no longer family. Her words pierced my heart like a blade. I looked at her, then at Chloe and Elias, who stood behind her with smirks. I wanted to push her aside, to scream that I was my father's son, that no one could stop me from saying goodbye to him. But I saw the onlookers' eyes, curiosity, pity, and knew that causing a scene would only prove them right about me. Vivian, I said, my voice calm but icy. You don't get to decide who my father's family is. I'm staying and I'll see to this funeral. If you want to stop me, call the police, but I warn you, I know my legal rights. She froze, clearly not expecting such a firm response. Elias stepped forward, about to say something, but Vivian raised a hand to stop him. Fine, Lucian, she said, her smile returning but laced with venom. You can stay. But don't think you'll get anything from James. He left everything to us. I didn't reply. I didn't care about the inheritance or Carter Enterprises. I just wanted to say goodbye to my father, to stand by him one last time. I stepped past Vivian to the casket. My father lay there, his face gaunt, his eyes closed as if sleeping. My throat tightened, tears threatening to spill. I'm sorry, Dad, I whispered, my hand lightly touching the casket's edge. I wasn't here when you needed me. The next few hours passed like a dream. I took charge of the funeral despite the cold stares from Vivian and her children. I chose a song my father loved, Amazing Grace, the one my mother used to sing to me. I wrote a short eulogy speaking of memories from my childhood when my father was the man who held me close and shared his dreams with me. I didn't mention Vivian or the years of estrangement. I just wanted people to remember my father as I did. But Vivian wouldn't let me have peace. Throughout the funeral, she whispered to Chloe and Elias, pointing at me as if I were an intruder. When I stood to deliver the eulogy, Elias coughed loudly, deliberately disrupting me. A few people turned to look, but I didn't stop. I spoke on, my voice trembling but resolute, and when I finished, I saw a few of Carter Enterprises' old employees nod, their eyes red. They understood. They knew who my father truly was. After the funeral, as people began to leave, Vivian pulled me aside. You think you're clever, don't you? She said, her voice low but venomous. You can stand here, pretending to grieve, but don't dream of taking anything from James. His will is written, and your name isn't in it. I looked at her, more exhausted than angry. I don't care about the will, Vivian, I said. I came here for my father, not for money. She scoffed as if she didn't believe me, then turned away, pulling Chloe and Elias with her. That night, I stayed at a small hotel on the outskirts of Franklin. I couldn't bear to sleep in the old house, where every corner stirred memories of painful days. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to recall my father's face in the casket. I wondered if he knew how hard I'd tried, if he knew I still loved him despite everything. The next morning, as I prepared to leave Franklin, a woman appeared in the hotel lobby. She wore a light green coat, her hair tied high, and her eyes filled with worry. Mr. Carter? She asked, her voice soft but certain. I'm the one who called you. I was your father's nurse. My heart pounded. Who are you? I asked, trying to stay calm. And what do you need to tell me about my father? She glanced around as if afraid someone might overhear, then handed me a thick envelope. This is what Mr. James wanted me to give you, she said. But you need to be careful. There are people who don't want you to know the truth. I took the envelope, feeling its weight like it carried the world. I wanted to open it right away, but the nurse's anxious look stopped me. "Read it somewhere safe," she said, then turned and vanished into the crowd on Franklin's streets. I returned to my room, locked the door, and opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter from my father along with a notarized will. I read the first lines and my heart seemed to stop. "Lucian, my son, I'm sorry for everything. I let you endure so much pain. This is the truth I want you to know." My father's trembling handwriting was like a knife, both painful and awakening. His letter was long, filled with remorse and secrets he'd kept hidden in his final years. He wrote that after my mother's death, he fell into a deep abyss of grief and Vivian appeared as an escape. He thought she'd bring stability to the family, but he was wrong. "Vivian wasn't the woman I thought she was," he wrote. "She manipulated me, Lucian, and I was too weak to see it." He revealed that Vivian controlled all his communications, emails, phone calls, preventing him from reaching out to me or even knowing where I was. She told him I hated him, that I'd cut off contact because I no longer wanted to be his son. I stopped reading, tears blurring the page. I remembered those brief, awkward calls from my father when I was in college, the way he'd ask, "Are you okay?" with a weary voice. I'd thought he didn't care, but now I knew the truth. Vivian had built a wall between us. She'd fed him lies, making him believe I was the betrayer. The letter went on to reveal chilling details. My father wrote that Vivian and Elias had pressured him to write a will that excluded me from all assets, including his shares in Carter Enterprises. "They made me feel like a failed father," he wrote. "I let them control me, Lucian, but in my final months I tried to make things right. By the time you read this, I may no longer be here, but I've drafted a new will. All my assets, the house, cars, yacht, horse racing track, and my shares in Carter Enterprises, I leave to you to decide their fate. You're the only one I trust to carry on the family legacy. I hope you can forgive me." Besides the letter, the envelope contained other documents, emails, notes, and audio recordings my father had secretly kept. One was a conversation between Vivian and a man named Raymond Holt, a competitor of Carter Enterprises. In it, Vivian promised to sell key company assets to Holt at a low price in exchange for a large sum transferred to her personal account. I listened to the recording, Vivian's voice cold and calculating, as if Carter Enterprises, my father's lifelong dream, was just a commodity for her to profit from. "James will never know," she told Holt. "He's dying and that brat Lucian is long gone." The truth left me trembling with rage and profound sorrow. My father had known the truth, had tried to make amends, but he ran out of time. I thought of the years I'd blamed him, the times I refused to call home, and my heart felt like it was shattering. But I also knew now wasn't the time to drown in grief. I had to act, not just for my father, but for myself, to protect his legacy and expose Vivian's manipulation. The next day, I contacted Franklin Ross, my father's longtime lawyer who'd worked with Carter Enterprises since before I was born. Mr. Ross was a tall, lean man with silver hair, sharp but kind eyes. I met him at his small office in downtown Franklin, where stacks of papers reached the ceiling. When I handed him my father's envelope, he read the letter and will, his expression growing grave. "Lucian," he said, his voice low, "these are critical documents. If what you say is true, Vivian and Elias have committed serious fraud." Mr. Ross explained that the fake will Vivian presented after the funeral could be overturned if we proved the legitimacy of the true will. He also said the recording of Vivian's conversation with Raymond Holt could serve as evidence in a civil or even criminal case if needed. I nodded, knowing this fight wouldn't be easy, but I was no longer the 12-year-old boy Vivian called a burden. I'd built my own career in Seattle, faced challenges I never thought I could overcome. I wouldn't let Vivian steal my father's legacy or let her win. Vivian, sensing the threat, began spreading rumors around Franklin. She told everyone I'd returned to snatch the inheritance, painting me as an opportunist exploiting my father's death. Some old neighbors who'd known me as a child looked at me with suspicion, but I didn't care. I knew the truth, and I had the evidence in my hands. I called Harold, my boss at Green Horizon, and requested 2 more weeks of leave. "I need to stay in Franklin to handle the funeral and some family matters, Harold," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. With his usual understanding, he agreed immediately. "Take care of your family, Lucian. I'll handle things here," he said, and I felt a slight sense of relief. I began discreetly tracking Vivian's movements. Each morning I left the hotel early, rented an old car to avoid being recognized, and quietly observed the family's old house. Vivian still lived there with Chloe and Elias, as if my father's death had no impact on them. I saw them coming and going, sometimes laughing as if nothing had happened, and it made my blood boil. My father had spent his life building Carter Enterprises, and now they were trying to steal his legacy. About a week after the funeral, I noticed something unusual. One afternoon, I saw Vivian, Chloe, and Elias leave the house together in a sleek black Mercedes. They were dressed formally, as if preparing for an important meeting. I followed, keeping enough distance to avoid detection. Their car stopped in front of an office building in downtown Franklin, where a sign read, "Thompson and Lee Law Offices." My heart raced. I was almost certain they were there to deal with the will. I parked on a side street, watching from a distance. Vivian strode into the office with confidence, Chloe and Elias trailing behind. I called Mr. Ross and told him to meet me at Thompson and Lee's office. Mr. Ross was silent for a moment before responding, "Lucian, I know that firm. They specialize in handling large inheritances. If Vivian's there, she might be trying to legitimize the fake will. Do you have the real will with you?" "Yes," I replied, my hand gripping the envelope in my jacket pocket. "I always carry it." "Good," Mr. Ross said. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. We'll go in and settle this." I waited for Mr. Ross in the car, my heart pounding. I thought of my father, his trembling handwriting in the letter, the way he apologized for the pain I'd endured. I couldn't let Vivian win, couldn't let her take what my father wanted for me. When Mr. Ross arrived, dressed in a silver gray suit and carrying a briefcase, I felt a spark of confidence return. "Let's go, Lucian," he said, his eyes sharp. "We'll put an end to this." We entered Thompson and Lee's office, where the air was cool and smelled of old paper. The receptionist looked up, slightly startled by our presence. "We need to see Mr. Thompson," Mr. Ross said, his voice authoritative. "It's regarding James Carter's will." The receptionist hesitated, but after a quick phone call led us to a small meeting room. Vivian, Chloe, and Elias were already there, seated around a long table with Mr. Thompson, a middle-aged man with gold-rimmed glasses and a stern expression. When Vivian saw me and Mr. Ross, she shot to her feet, her face paling. "What are you doing here, Lucian?" she shouted, her voice breaking. "Sit down, Mrs. Carter," Mr. Ross said, his tone calm but unyielding. He turned to Mr. Thompson, presenting the real will and my father's letter. "I'm the attorney representing Lucian Carter, the rightful heir of James Carter. We have evidence that the will Mrs. Vivian presented is fraudulent." The room fell silent. Mr. Thompson took the documents, his expression growing graver as he read. Vivian tried to interject, her voice trembling. "It's fake. Lucian's trying to deceive us all." I stepped forward, locking eyes with Vivian. "You manipulated my father, Vivian," I said, my voice low but powerful. "You kept him from contacting me, forced him to write a fake will, and now you're trying to sell Carter Enterprises assets to Raymond Holt. I have proof, the recording, emails, everything." Elias, sitting nearby, flushed red, glaring at me like a cornered animal. He stood abruptly, his chair crashing to the floor. "Lucian, you want to die, daring to—" Before he could finish, Mr. Thompson looked up, his gaze icy. "Mrs. Carter, Elias, these are very serious allegations. If these documents are verified, you could face severe civil or even criminal charges." Vivian collapsed into her chair, her face ashen. Elias tried to speak, but his voice faltered, and Chloe began to cry. I looked at them, feeling not triumph, but a deep sadness. They'd had everything: the house, the money, my father's protection. But their greed drove them to take what wasn't theirs. I took a deep breath and said, "Mr. Thompson, I don't want to sue them. I just want justice for my father. I demand that Vivian, Chloe, and Elias leave my family's home immediately and never return to Franklin. If they agree, I won't pursue further action." Vivian stared at me, her eyes a mix of shock and hatred. "You think you're so noble?" she hissed. But Mr. Ross raised a hand, cutting her off. "Mrs. Vivian, I advise you to accept Lucian's offer," he said. "If this goes to court, you'll lose far more than a house." After a tense silence, Vivian nodded, her lips pursed tightly. Chloe and Elias said nothing, heads bowed as they followed their mother out of the room. Mr. Thompson promised to verify the documents and ensure the real will was executed. As the door closed behind them, I felt as if a weight had been lifted, but it left an emptiness in my heart. I'd won. I'd secured justice for my father, but the cost was years of estrangement, words left unsaid, and a family I'd once hoped to mend now broken forever. I stayed in Franklin for another week to finalize the matters related to the will. Mr. Ross worked tirelessly, ensuring that all of my father's assets, from Carter Enterprises to the family home, were legally transferred to me. Vivian, as I had demanded, vacated the house the next day. Chloe and Elias resigned from the company and left a few days later. I heard they moved to another city, possibly Philadelphia, where Vivian had relatives. I didn't care where they went, only hoping they'd never return to Franklin or try to meddle in my life again. The old house was now mine, but I didn't want to live there. It held too many memories, both sweet and painful. I decided to transform it into a community center, a place where Franklin's children could come to learn, play, and dream, as my mother had once encouraged me to do. I hired a team to renovate the house, preserving its vintage charm while adding modern spaces. A small library, an art room, and a garden where I placed a small statue of a paper crane in memory of my mother. Carter Enterprises was a bigger challenge. Under Vivian's influence, the company had strayed from my father's original vision. Luxury projects, shady deals with Raymond Holt, and a lack of financial transparency had tarnished its reputation. I knew restoring it wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to do so, not just for my father, but for the values I believed in. I returned to Seattle to wrap up my work at Green Horizon, but I knew I'd need to spend significant time in Franklin to revive Carter Enterprises. Harold, my respected boss, supported my decision. "You have a chance to do something great, Lucian," he said. "Make that company something your father would be proud of." I nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also a surge of motivation. In the months that followed, I split my time between Seattle and Franklin. I worked with Carter Enterprises veteran employees, those who'd been with my father from the early days. They shared stories of the company's golden years when my father was young, passionate, and always put the community first. Those stories inspired me, helping me craft a new plan. Focus on affordable housing, sustainable projects, and support for struggling families in Franklin. One of the first projects I launched was the redevelopment of the old neighborhood Elias and Vivian had wanted to demolish for a luxury resort. I partnered with nonprofit organizations using Carter Enterprises funds to build decent homes, a community park, and a vocational training center. When the project was completed, seeing families move into their new homes felt like fulfilling a promise to my father and to my mother. As Carter Enterprises began to regain momentum, I felt I was carrying forward my father's legacy in my own way. The company wasn't just a business. It was a means to create positive change, as my mother had taught me about kindness and responsibility. I hung a paper crane in my office right beside my father's portrait, as a reminder of what had brought me here. My story doesn't end with my victory over Vivian or inheriting Carter Enterprises. It ends with a lesson I learned through years of pain and struggle. A true legacy isn't just about assets, but about truth, justice, and responsibility to the community. I forgave my father not because he deserved it, but because I needed to let go to move forward. I learned not to let manipulators like Vivian define me, and I cherished the values my mother and father left behind: resilience, kindness, and faith in a better world. Franklin was no longer a place that confined me. It was where I rediscovered myself and built a new legacy, not just for my father, but for the generations to come.